Welcome back to the program. Quite a conversation there with the guys. And we're moving on to the first leg of our conversation. And you know what they say about education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. As a matter of fact, back home, there's a consensus that when you solve the challenge of education, you would have solved by a very huge percentage other challenges of insecurity and unemployment. But as we progress, we would like to look at the strides of the administration in the area of education, particularly as we approach the first anniversary of the Bola Tinubu-led government. And joining us to look at this, we have two educationists on the program this morning. We have joining us via Zoom, Professor Abiodun Adeshegun. He's the chairman, Babcock University Schools Management Board. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Bukola. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. And I'm glad that you can hear me. Professor Adeshegun, by the way, is also the former Dean, School of Education and Humanities, Babcock University. Also joining us in our Lagos studio, we have Mrs. Boyede Adebanjo. She's an educationist. Good morning and welcome, madam.
Good morning.
It's good to have you. So I'm going to start with you. Let's look holistically at some of the promises that the administration put forward at the beginning of at the onset of the administration. Let's look at educational infrastructure. The administration promised to invest in infrastructure of educational institutions and provide adequate resources. There's also accreditation standards and curriculum, teacher training, just to mention a few. In the last 1 year, what are your thoughts on the investment in these areas to improve the quality of education?
Okay. I think that in terms of what has been released, the promises by the government, I think they're definitely along the right lines. Most of them are tilted towards the public sector. And some of them we can see, from looking from outside. I manage a private school, so I'm not in the public sector. But then I've seen that, yes, there's been some progress in refurbishing some of the public schools around us. In terms of curriculum, there have been changes or promises of changes. There's been an addition of history to the curriculum recently. I think in the last 2 years or so, which was a very welcome, introduction. There's also been an increased push for cohesion in terms of curriculum and term dates and things like that. So I see that things are being done. In terms of teacher training, there's been a lot of publicity around that. And in fact, I find that teachers now are more interested in becoming public school teachers. And I think that's because these promises are look attractive to people. So the promises are out there. We're seeing that things are being done, but we're looking forward to, actually reaping the fruits of those policies.
And these observations that you make, just to confirm, they are towards, schools that are owned by federal government, as against across and state government as well. Okay, let's come to you, Professor Adeshegun. I wonder if your observations are different or the same or more.
Well, he did promise access to education via student loan, which has kicked off now. And then he said that the president said that we're not going to be having strikes by ASU any longer. There was a recent threat of a strike when the governing councils of universities were not inaugurated, and the government quickly did that. But beyond all of that, I think that there is still a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done in the sense that the way we are approaching the issue of education is just using the same methodologies, and we will arrive at the same results. The fact is that we need to really revamp the educational sector. And after the Second World War, when Europe was devastated, the United States came up with what was called the Marshall Plan, which kicked off in 1948 and lasted in 1951. At that time, they poured $13.3 billion into Europe to rebuild infrastructure, to kickstart the economy, and to bring a better life to all. We must all understand that education is the bedrock of development and industrial revolution. And we don't seem to understand that yet until we address the situation of education as if we are addressing a war-ravaged place that we now want to turn around, then we are not yet there. And for us to get there, we need to have the right vision. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy addressed the joint session of the United States Congress, and he said, it is our intention to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, that is by 1970. That was the vision. And everything was done to drive that vision so that even after his administration had gone and Lyndon Johnson had become president, it was achieved within the time frame for which it was said it was projected. So what we need now in Nigeria is to have the vision that, okay, we want to develop this society. Education is so fundamental to everything that we need to say, okay, we need a truly Nigerian car in the next 5 years. I'm going to put all the experts together. I'm going to lock them up in a room and throw away the key. And they must come up with the solution so that in 5 years' time, we achieve the target of exactly what we want. What we are putting into education right now is like playing with kid gloves.
Right.
When compared to what we're doing.
And that's rather ironic. It looks like everybody appreciates, acknowledges the role that education plays in building a nation, I mean, from the society upward. But it looks like we're not doing what we ought to do in that line, particularly in terms of budgeting and the rest. But let's take a look at this next promise that was made by this government before it came into power. And it's on accreditation standards and curriculum, which is key to the standard of education you get across board. So take a look at what this government promised prior to coming into power. New accreditation standards will be developed for all institutions from the primary to the tertiary levels. All institutions of learning in Nigeria will eventually be required to comply with these new standards after a reasonable period of adjustment. So that was the major part of that promise. And I'd like to come to you, madam. We've talked about how it looks like the children learn or study one thing in school, and when they get out there, it's a different ball game entirely. And we've always talked about how we need to match what they learn in school with what they'll face in real life, particularly because the world is changing really fast. You know, what was obtainable 10 years ago since changed. COVID came and literally took us 10 years into the future, working from home, artificial intelligence, and the rest. What are the things you'd like to see as an addition or an upgrade to our current curriculum in the country?
Okay. So I think generally our curriculum, the Nigerian curriculum, is archaic in a sense. It hasn't moved with times, as you said. And apart from the content of the curriculum, the way that we expose the curriculum to the children is very important. You know, so instead of the like regurgitative method that we use, say, you know, teaching children that this is yellow and then they repeat to us that this is yellow, we should move away from that and into the children asking questions. Okay, you say it's yellow, but why is it yellow? How do we know it's yellow? What if we don't want it to be yellow? Those are the sort of questions that we need the children to be asking. I mean, this is a very simple example I'm using. But imagine children being able to ask questions like that in science, in social studies. They'll be, you know, they'll start to think of new things. There'll be innovation. They would question the status quo, and then they would be able to create new things for Nigeria. And that's what tends to happen in many societies where, you know, that are very innovative. It's because people question. They have critical thinking skills. They're encouraged to have critical thinking skills. It's infused in the curriculum. It's infused in the way the teachers ask questions. It's infused in the sort of projects that the children are expected to do, you know, as opposed to just sort of learning and being able to repeat things. They need to be able to question it and prove it and do something new with it. And I think that's what we really need to do with our curriculum at the primary school and secondary school stages. Apart from upgrading the content, you know, as you said, AI is new. Do we have that in our Nigerian IT curriculum? We also need to change the way even the teachers think. Because if the teachers are not thinking this way, they're not going to encourage the children to think that way. So those changes definitely need to happen.
I just want to ask, Prof, is it too early to expect a change in curriculum, a proper upgrade? It's been 1 year. I know there's been that debate, is 1 year enough to rate this government or not? But education is not waiting, the world is not waiting. So is this something you expect that the government should have already gone far with in 1 year?
Yeah, in the dying days of the Buhari administration, the National Universities Commission initiated a new curriculum review, which is called CC-MAS, which the universities are keen into right now. But my thing with that is that, okay, so all the universities have the same curriculum. And I think this cannot make way for innovation, research, and real development in the sense that people have to have niches. You know, institutions have to have niches for which they are known for. For, like you said, artificial intelligence, robotics, and stuff like that. The curriculum that the new one now, because it's a new one that all universities have to key into, does not address those issues. And so we need to unlock the potentials of Nigerians and Nigerian scholars and the children to be able to compete with the best in the world. It is not rocket science because we see all what is going on all over the world at this time. We see the innovations being made, and a lot of money needs to be put in research and development. In older universities across the world, they have endowments like Stanford, like MIT, like Harvard, like Oxford. So they have a lot of money in which they pour into research to be able to do groundbreaking work and create new things that are happening there. So we may not need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to give the universities more autonomy to determine which areas to want to be known for or to be best at, so that they can really produce groundbreaking work that can move our society forward at this time.
All right, let me come back to you. I may stay with you for a bit, Prof, because is a public sector here, and this is quite critical. One thing about education that is very important is that if you don't invest now, you see the impact tomorrow. If you invest now, you see the impact tomorrow. So it's not something you can hide. So if we trickle down to the issue of teacher training, which is quite critical, this government in their promise had mentioned the fact that we will introduce new accreditation requirement for teachers in federally funded primary and secondary school standardized teaching courses and training courses, as well as teacher welfare will be paramount under Tinubu administration. Teaching will be a rewarding career option for capable young graduates. So when you talk about teacher training, which is quite critical under some of the quality education for all promise that they've made, how much of that are you seeing? And will, in the last 1 year, have they done enough? Because we're doing 1 year now. Have they done enough to attract the kind of young people into that space as much as possible, given what is playing out with Labour and the federal government in terms of negotiation?
Yeah. We have the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria. And Govt University, my university, is one of those that are training teachers at the moment for the wider society. So people go into that and they come up with certification to be teachers and professionally qualified to actually do the job, such as much as you having ICANN inducting chartered accountants. So this is where the way things are going in the country at the moment. But we still need to attract the right type of people into the teaching profession, as you said. People see it as a last resort. If they don't get a job in the oil company or some other mega company, then they look at teaching and say, well, you know, maybe I should go into that. But you don't have first-class graduates, for instance, going to teaching. And this is not the way to go. So we need to make teaching more attractive by increasing the remuneration and the incentives and the training, both locally and internationally, to attract the best brains in that business. Because don't forget that these teachers are the ones that will train doctors, that will train lawyers, that will train scientists, that will train engineers. So this is the bedrock of everything, and we need to really address it and ensure that the right type of people are the ones teaching, and we are getting the required output from their productivity.
Madam, I know you play in the private space, so my question exactly is, are you seeing enough being done from, I'm sure you have colleagues in the public sector, because mostly of some of these things are in the public sector. Are you seeing enough being done in 1 year to train teachers, teaching the, is it training the trainer, or that's what it's called now?
I haven't seen enough to make me think that it's, a great job has been done. I've heard enough to think that at least we're on the right track, but I haven't seen enough. And definitely we need more training. And beyond training, and I keep saying this, beyond training, we need other things to work to help teachers and students to be able to even imagine certain things. So a student who doesn't have power at home and is learning, by the way, I understand that Lagos State wants to introduce or is in the process of introducing robotics at primary and secondary school level. So that's a good thing. But then a child who is learning robotics in school goes home and doesn't have power. Or a teacher who is teaching robotics in school goes home and doesn't have power to do much more than the maybe 30 minutes that they're doing in school. How much more can they really do with what they're learning? So it's even a lot more than the salary that the teachers will collect. It's, having a functional society working so that people can expose themselves to, things that would improve their work in teaching. I think that's very important. It's not even just about the salary. It's about that quality of life that will give somebody the peace of mind to research a bit more on their own, to, see what's happening in Singapore and try to replicate or even do better here. But if you don't even have the power, or, data is an issue, how do we really want to get into doing the best that we can?
And teacher training is perhaps directly connected to this next layer of promise by the administration, which is school management. The administration promised that new managed system for federally funded primary and secondary schools in Nigeria. Such schools will be managed by boards of education. And perhaps you could also tie that to the recent outcomes of, the joint admissions and matriculation board examinations that students sat for, where 76% scored below 200, which was a dismal performance. So if you look at those layers of promise, teacher training, under school management, would you say, maybe I should come to you now, Prof, because you are the one receiving the students into the universities. So would you say that school management has been delivered under this promise, as particularly from federally owned secondary schools? Would you say that teacher training and school management, that promise has been delivered?
Well, I think there is still a long way to go with regards to this, because the quality of students that we receive keeps dropping by the day. And we begin to wonder, how are we going to manage these students in the university? But what is coming to the fore is that JAMB is using more scientific methods to conduct their exams, and the real performance of those students are coming out for everybody to see. When people can no longer cheat. Those of them that come to Babcock University to take the JAMB exam, we put them where we have CCTV and all of that, and we ensure that we are not one of those that have been called the miracle center for someone to come and score 350, by stealth. So a lot of work needs to be done at the primary and secondary school level to produce the right quality of students to be able to, compete very well with their counterparts in other parts of the world. But having said that, parents also need to kick in. For instance, we read in the news that there was a father that was caught writing the JAMB for his very word. How can that be? Because are you coming to the university also to write exams for your son or what? So these things have to be checked. The parental attitude has to be corrected, and students have to be helped to understand that they need there is dignity in hard work and labor, so that they can achieve what they want on their own. Nigerian students are not dull, but they need to be guided and to be helped to be able to do what is good and what is right. And so far as I can see, in this last 1 year, we have not done well in that area at all.
Eventually, we'll tally the scores. Since we have educators here, we'll tally the scores and come up with a final score for this government in the past 1 year. But I want to go to an issue which is very vital as well, and it concerns funding. And this is one of the promises made, Special Education Fund. It says, through new legislation, government will establish a special education fund consisting of zero-coupon federal bonds. Those are not terms that are popular here, coupons, for example. But that's what the government promised when it comes to funding the education sector. Went on to say that through this, essentially various mechanisms, bonds will be sold in tranches to private investors, purchased in market clearing exercises by the CBN. And this government believes it will help fund the education sector. I'll come to you, Madam, in the studio, because we've seen it looks like the private sector, when it comes to education, is doing quite well when it comes to funding. And it's a no-brainer. The private sector charges way more than the public sector. But when it comes to public goods, people wouldn't want to pay as much, because people who approach public goods are people, most times, who can't afford to pay as much in the private sector. So if this is the thinking for government, it's possible that, of course, the cost of education in the public sector will go up. And that's why we're seeing the student loans. There should be more funding there. But if there's anything you think government can borrow from the private sector in terms of funding and utilizing the funds appropriately, what is that thing you think it should be? Maybe we can incorporate this while the government is working on it.
Okay. At the end of the day, I think that the government needs to recognize that even if they're funding public schools, there needs to be the value created. And even if you're not looking to make a profit from something, the thing must return some value, yes. And if you place a priority on that, then whatever it is you're pumping into it, whether it's 1 naira or 10 million naira, then there's somebody there that's following it through. Because what we find is that the country generally raises funds for different things, but somewhere along the way it gets lost and it never really reaches those people that it's for. And in the private sector, that wouldn't happen because somebody has worked hard or taken a loan to get these monies, and there must be a return on that investment. So I think what we really need to do is the proper monitoring. So it's okay to say we're going to have some a certain amount put towards government schools, but who is actually monitoring it? Who is actually making sure that those things are going towards what they're supposed to do? And who is recording impact? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want to see. 76% failure rate at JAM is terrible. It should be flipped around. It should be 76% pass rates. So I think monitoring and recording impact is important. It's not enough to just announce, oh, we have pumped a certain amount of money into public schools, which is what we tend to see. What we need to hear is the results. We pumped in this amount, and this is what it resulted in after five years. I think that's what's key. If there is someone monitoring it and ensuring that it's going to the right people.
All right, Prof, let's come to you now, Prof, on this next one, which has to do with student loans. By the way, the issue of school management board, I see that when it comes to the promises of this administration, they are big on primary and secondary. School management board, by their thinking, is to ensure that there's independent thinking, so that if you have a school management board, a governor cannot just go and sack a principal because the person came late to work. It's a board that will do that. Maybe you speak to that. But let's talk to one of the things he said, students' loan, which is what literally everybody is quite familiar with. It was repealed and reenacted, and we've seen it was going to take effect in the next 48 hours. But there's something he said in the campaign promise. He said, at the same time, this will give institutions the ability to charge more cost-reflective tuition fees. So it looks like there is going to be autonomy in the works, which is why this is introduced first, more like this first before that. So I want you to speak to the issue of these students' loans. Some have criticized it, some have said it's a good step in the right direction. What exactly do you see when it comes to the issue of students' loan?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think it's a step in the right direction to create more access for people to have the education that they want. But, you know, in the past 24 hours, they have made a clarification that, no, this is not only for federal public schools, it's stage by stage. At the stage, we are going to involve state schools. And I didn't hear anything about involving the private schools in these things. And I just laughed because the students in private institutions are Nigerians as well. Let's go back to the TED Fund, which is contributed by private companies in Nigeria. Yet, private institutions do not have access to TED Fund. It stands on its head in logic that private institutions contribute this money and the private schools that other Nigerians patronize do not have access. Why? There are equally Nigerians that can contribute to what is going on in the public space. Be that as it may, you know that there's been a lot of criticism that you put 5 billion in student loan and then you put 90 billion in pilgrimage to Mecca. So we need to just readdress our priorities and make sure that every Nigerian child, regardless of the institution that they attend, have access, because they all have a lot to contribute to our commonwealth as a country. Ideas can come from anywhere. Innovation can come from anywhere. Good research can come from anywhere. And we need to tap into all these things and fund these things properly. And like Mr. Adebanjo has said, make sure that you get value for money. Let me tell you that at Babcock, people say, oh, yeah, Babcock is one of the expensive schools. No. We have an IPP, that's Independent Power Project, that supplies 24-hour power to the campus. So you don't go to the place and you begin to wonder, what am I going to do? Is that going to be power or not? You go to many of our universities and institutions, every department has a generator at the back of the head of the department's office. And then everybody puts on their generator at the same time. There is smoke everywhere. There is a lot of noise, bedlam of noises all over the place. While trying to study, it is unacceptable. So we need to fund both the institutions and the students. Do you know that in my time when we were at the university, there was bursary award that was given to students. This was not even a loan. It is just bursary you are given. Whether you are in private institutions or public, you got that thing. And then suddenly it just died down and Nigerians don't have access any longer. I think the situation should be reversed in such a way that we are able to get the most benefit from, the money that we spend on education. As I said at the beginning, education is the bedrock of development. Nigeria cannot develop if it plays short shrift to education. We have to take the bull by the horns and say, okay, this is where we want to get to. And this is what we want to do in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. We want, robotics to be fully accepted in Nigeria and all of that. And then we work towards it to achieve what we want.
Right.
So by now, we should be talking of a truly Nigerian car, not, importing CKDs from China or Taiwan and putting them together and saying this is a car made in Nigeria. What is that? We should be able to manufacture all the parts of the cars and put the car together right here in the country. And we can only do that if we fund research and development to the extent that.
Prof, let's bring it to the studio. Madam, I needed your take because if there's any promise made and about to be fulfilled, is the student's loan, because it takes off on the 24th, which is Friday. So I needed your take on what you see.
I think it's definitely a good idea because it opens up access to some people who would never have had the opportunity. But then it seems the process of actually getting the loan is a tough one, which excludes many people, the people that probably actually really need the loan, because you have to know certain people in certain positions, and I believe that would exclude some people. But nonetheless, it's a good start. We have some people that have apparently been able to sign on. But let's see how it works out. I think it's a step in the right direction. Let's see how it works out. And more importantly, how do they plan to get the monies back from these students? I know that in other countries, the market for the job market is buoyant, and people are more or less guaranteed to get a job, and then it means that they're guaranteeing payment back. How do we want to deal with that? How does that work? That I'm still not very clear on how that would work in the future, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
And well, just to quickly add that the bill went for another amendment before it became law eventually, and some of the bottlenecks were removed. Speaking of which, one was removing the threshold of income for families that qualify to access the loan. So it's still going to be tested, and that's why I want to stay on the students' loan promise as a deliverable by the administration, because if you look at the manifesto, as Jeffrey quoted earlier, it's as if they're putting one before the others, after which the universities will now be granted the liberty, to charge fees. Prof, is there any concern within the university community in that regard? Because, ahead of the legislation on the student loan, there had been plans announced by the government for university autonomy for universities. So in that regard, are there any concerns that there would be onward suspension of funding of federal tertiary institutions by the administration? And how do you think the university leadership, ASU and the likes, would react to this if that would be the case, or if that would be the intention of the federal government upon the implementation of the Students' Loan Act?
Thank you very much, Bukola. I think the answer is in your question. There's a lot of concern that what government is trying to do is to divest itself from funding education. At the stage of our development right now, we cannot afford to do that, because government is a big player in the educational sector, and they need to give a direction as to where we want to go. And so they must continue to fund these institutions until the institutions are able to stand on their own and get endowments from corporations and companies for which they work and all of that, to be able to do what they need to do. When Japan was transiting from a feudal agrarian society to an industrial society, it was the government, the Japanese government, that took the bull by the horns to establish the institutions, the secondary schools, the primary schools, the universities. They were all publicly owned at the beginning. And they poured a lot of money there to ensure that the target that they wanted was achieved. And that was that they wanted to copy the West. Okay, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If the West is doing this way, let us just go that way at the very beginning and then see what we can do. And you find that those merchant families in Japan back then, the Toyotas, the Mitsubishis, and so on, these were people that were involved in agriculture. They are now the technological giants of the same country today because they have evolved over time. So it takes time before government can win the universities away from, the funding that they provide. So they need to provide that funding, and they need to provide the same funding for private institutions, because students from those places also serve in the National University Service Corps scheme, the NYSC. They contribute to the country, as I was saying. So everybody needs to get involved one way or the other. Maybe you might not fund infrastructure in private universities, but you can fund research and development, fund research, so that people can do groundbreaking research. The money will not be an object into, going pell-mell into the laboratory and producing something that is reasonable. They talked about, encouraging STEM education, which is fine. But we need to walk the talk and do that. And then we don't need to forget the humanities, because this is what makes us human.
Right.
If you neglect the arts and the humanities, then you get into trouble. If you train an accountant and you do not give him also the same training ethically, he doesn't know God, and he has no ethical or moral values, you have just created a clever criminal. You've given him the tools to be able to work, and because he doesn't know good from bad, he's not going to do very well. So you cannot neglect the culture, the language, and religion in education. You have to bring everything together to form a holistic package.
The essence of this conversation, really, having both of you on board, is to sort of learn on both sides, public learning from the private, particularly because we've seen the private able to replicate across board and keep that momentum. So using that kind of view to look at what the government is doing, obviously will be very vital to helping to contribute a robust, angle to this conversation. But there's something I'd like us to speak to. We've talked about funding, but then the cost itself is also a big part of this conversation. Are we paying too low for education in Nigeria? Or are we paying too much for education in Nigeria? Now I ask because you're in the private sector, and it's been said that the private sector, people are paying too much, and that's why a lot of people cannot afford. But on the flip side, in the public sector, we've said people are paying too low, and it's hard to invest in that sector if you're paying too low. So is there a middle ground we can come to here, Prof, before I come to you, madam?
Thank you very much, Kawde. My view is that we are paying too low. If we say we are training a medical doctor with 250,000 naira per annum, it's a huge joke. What are we talking about here? So we need to see what are the cost components of what is being offered. All right. So you find the private sector charging realistic fees because many of them provide 24-hour power supply by themselves, as I mentioned. Then, you provide food and accommodation. Parents who pay less in institutions that are public also have to pay for their children's education in town. I mean, their accommodation in town. They have to have money for food separately, which if they had everything together, with the transportation to the university from the outside hostel to the campus and all of that, and if you add everything together, it boils down to the same thing. That you have a university that is fully accommodating the students, is feeding them 3 square meals a day and all of that. You add all that money together with the money parents pay by going to places where they have to rent houses for their wards, and they have to provide food for them, and you put the cost together, they all balance out. They're almost the same. And let me tell you that, for some of us, we recognize the inclement economic situation in the country.
Right.
And a place like Bako, for instance, we allow students to pay installmentally. You don't have to pay all your school fees at once. But you have to agree to say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to pay 3 times, and then, even the child of a pepper seller can have access to that education.
Okay, that might be a premium pepper seller at this rate, because that debate has been a thing, even though some will also fall to your calculation and say, well, it's not quite the same for us in the public sector. But this is a conversation we must have. We need to
Let me tell you
define,
something.
we need to define education, Prof.
Mm,
Just answer this and I'll come to Madam. So is education
yes.
meant to be a social, will I call it a social amenity, or just leave it as what some people say it should be, just like every other goods and service, that the price is determined by demand and supply and the cost itself?
Education is a social service. There's no doubt about it, because doing anything less, not providing it as a social service, will lead to chaos in the society. And, those students that we don't train, we end up, destroying the entire civilization and society. So people must have access to it. And the debate is, what are the best ways to ensure that access? The student loan is a start, but it needs to be better funded than what it is now. And universities need to come up with not just, charges in terms of school fees, but look for ways to get sponsorship from corporate organizations. If you do research for, let us say, Nestle PLC, if a university is doing research for them, they will fund that research to a large extent. So we need to look for places that can give endowments to universities so that everything is not based on school fees alone.
Okay, pardon me to come in here, Prof. And let me bring in
Right.
our guest to the studio. Pardon me, Prof. Your thoughts on this? It's been a debate ongoing. If it's a social amenity, then it should be not just accessible, but affordable.
Okay, I agree with Prof. It's definitely a social service, and it should remain a social service. But I also think that, especially at university level, tertiary education level, people are not paying enough. I mean, 250,000 for a medical degree is, what are we really expecting from that? But I think the issue is not so much how much it costs, but how are we funding it? The government needs to put good money towards education, one. Two, it needs to encourage companies, wealthy families, wealthy people to create these endowments that Prof is talking about. That's how it's done in other places. Education is not cheap, even in countries where students get free education. It's still not cheap. Someone is paying for it, So it's an issue of we need to pay the universities well. But who is making these payments? We can't expect the child of a pepper seller to pay, a huge amount. But if we recognize that that child has promise, that child has great results, then there should be a system in place that allows that child to be able to access the next level of education. And that's where the government comes in. I don't think that the government can completely divest, from education. No. And then there should be encouragement for private institutions and wealthy people to adopt a wing, medical school, or to adopt the business school of a certain university, things like that. And then it will be paid for.
Absolutely, because we see in Harvard, initially, some people think it's all about scholarship sometimes in Harvard. They have legacy admission as well. If your father can give Harvard, say, $2 million every year, your chances may be high because, of course, they call it legacy admissions and all of that. Just have some bit of intelligence, and that can pave the way. Prof, there's another part to this conversation, which is more like what gives you the biggest flack, which has to do with the welfare of university teachers. ASU has fired the initial shot. We're looking at them just like we're looking at labor, how this is going to play out. And we've seen situations where ASU, I think SANU, and all of the unions go on strike over issue of welfare. And if there's anything this government has to do going forward, because this is 1 year down the line, everybody's been asked to be patient, but we don't know how long people can be patient when it comes to the difficulty people are facing. What can the government do to stop incessant strike? From the records we have between 1999 to 2023, ASU went on strike for about 16 times. And if you calculate the number of days, it's about 4 years plus. It has to stop. What can be done by the Tinubu administration to put an end?
Yeah, I think a lot can still be done. When you talk of welfare, first of all, you are talking of the wages of university teachers and workers. It needs to be benchmarked against, what is happening in other countries, because if you don't want them to leave the shores of Nigeria, what we call the Japa syndrome, where people just leave, then you have to benchmark what you are doing with what is going on elsewhere. And that is to ensure that these people are comfortable. Mr. Adebanjo mentioned Singapore the other time. That's one of the places where teachers are the highest paid in the whole planet. And you talk of the Nordic countries, Norway and Sweden and all of that. So you need to pay these people very well, because they are the ones that will produce the medical doctors, they will produce the engineers, the lawyers, and all other professionals that you have out there. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is to provide a conducive environment for learning, which is to have uninterrupted power supply and to have enough money to do research and to create the ambience that will, enthuse students to study. But where you have dilapidated buildings and you don't have reagents in laboratories and things are not functioning very well, the toilets are bad and all of that, and you expect the students not to misbehave, of course they will misbehave. Teachers also will misbehave. But if all these things are taken care of, then, we have what is very close to the ideal. And we can now task them. You can set targets that, we want you to produce something. Like during COVID, how many of our universities were able to produce a COVID vaccine? Other universities all over the world were producing, in conjunction with, companies, AstraZeneca and the Pfizer and the other companies and all the rest of them. So we need to create that conducive environment. The take-home pay must take the workers in the universities and in fact, the workers of Nigeria generally. So this issue that I heard you say this morning that, okay, the minimum wage is now 54,000 naira, I don't think we are serious at all. Judging by the level of inflation that we have had in the last 1 year, to me, a minimum wage should not be less than 100,000, because people have to survive, and you don't want them to go corrupt. You don't want them to go rogue and be stealing from the institutions and places where they work. If you don't pay people well, we are tempting them to commit things which they should not. And that's what's happening all over the place, that people say, oh, well, my welfare is not well taken care of. When I retire, my pensions and gratuities will not be paid, so I might well take care of myself and find some other means.
All right, Prof.
So a lot needs to be done here, please. And we need to do it now. The time is now. It's an urgent thing that needs to be done now.
I know you're also in the private sector, but I needed you to weigh in, because at the end of the day, we're all in the same society. When the students leave your school or leave Babcock or leave any private university, and probably all of us meet in the same marketplace. So this affects all of us. What can be done to stop this, cutting short our calendar?
What do you mean?
I mean, ASU,
okay.
strikes. You have that consistency in the private sector.
Yes.
It's not a question at all.
So I think it comes down to teacher welfare. I mean, if they're supposed to be remunerated, well, properly. For a teacher to leave their house, get into rush hour traffic, and come in, because it's not an easy job teaching a classroom full of children. So they need to be well paid. They need to be well paid to do the job properly. And we've established that it's a very important job. We've established that without teachers, without professors, the country probably would not move forward, because there would be no growth. So definitely there needs to be stable remuneration, high remuneration. What that is, I cannot say here. And it needs to be consistent. I mean, it's not fair for people to work and then they have to wait maybe 3 months to collect their salaries. Now, the minimum wage, I know that Prof has said that it should be about 100,000, which would be nice, but how practical is it to jump from where we are now to 100,000? Because this would also impact private companies. You know, where are those those companies are also operating in Nigeria today? How are they? How is their payroll supposed to triple? You know, almost overnight if that happens. So a lot needs to go in. I don't know. It's we can't just focus on the teachers' salaries. A lot needs to go into the way the government is run for the economy to thrive, and then we'll be able to afford these things. But it's definitely something that we should do. Teachers need to be paid well.
Well, I imagine that the job of a lecturer is a Herculean one, having to engage with about 100 students in class, having to mark scripts, having to continually do research, having to teach those students, you know, and very, very demanding, if you ask me. So
you sound like a lecturer.
There should be a reconsideration in that regard. But I'd like also to look at another aspect of, you know, our curriculum against the backdrop of this thinking that, you know, education is a scam. I wonder if there is a very viable alternative in that regard, which would be vocational education. And there is a layer of promise also from the administration as far as that is concerned. Speaking of which, as contained in the manifesto, the promise is to reform of technical and vocational learning institutions to stimulate Nigeria's natural entrepreneurial spirit and empower more individuals towards self-reliance. I wonder if you're seeing any activity in that regard, and should it, even in the first place, be an alternative to the thinking that education is a scam? Are we directing, you know, our education towards the outcome of alignment with global practices? I'll start with you in the studio, madam.
I definitely don't think education is a scam. But what I do think is that education comes in different forms. And in Nigeria especially, we tend to focus on a university degree being the ultimate. The truth is that we're all four of us sitting here are all very different. And I could take a completely different path and turn out just as successful as somebody who goes to university and studies to be a medical doctor. So we definitely need to explore alternatives. We need to make sure that those alternatives are attractive. We need to make sure that when those people attend, you know, I think there's schools for, like, you know, electricians and things like that. When they attend those schools, there should be a clear difference between an electrician that has attended such an institution and an electrician that just learned from maybe his neighbor. There should be a clear difference. And this is what would help that electrician to charge a bit more for his labor. And that's when we'll start to see a difference. You know, people will then step up to say, okay, I can't go to university, but I can learn, you know, to do something different and do it well. And I would be able to be well paid. I think we definitely need to drive those alternatives. Not everybody has to do JAM, not everybody has to go to university, but are there, you know, viable alternatives for everybody? Because there should be.
Prof, I imagine that you'd have some thoughts on this as well.
Yes, indeed. You know, Mrs. Adebanjo has said it all, that we need to provide alternatives in order to ensure that we all grow together. There are certifications that people can do in certain professions. So those who don't go to tertiary institutions can do that. But those who are in tertiary institutions, like polytechnics and all, we need to rejig what we are offering them so that their contemporaries don't look down on them and people don't see the polytechnic as a dumping ground. There's no reason that, you know, polytechnics cannot offer degrees, Bachelor of Technology degrees and other specialized degrees for people who are in the professions, you know, whether electrical engineering or electronics or whatever that they are doing. And that's why, you know, a place like MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is world famous. And all the polytechnics abroad now are offering degrees. They are not offering HND any longer. So for those who choose to go that route or that path, we need to encourage them and ensure that we streamline their curriculum in a way that they will also earn the degrees that their counterparts in universities are earning, and they will get parity in payments and all of that. And for those who don't have that opportunity, as I said, certification is the way to go. There are people that are certified in IT, in computer science, in AI, artificial intelligence, and other things, and they are employed by organizations all over the world, and they are well remunerated, sometimes even remunerated as much or more than those who have university degrees. That's the way to go. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to know what is working outside our country, and we need to adopt the same thing for the country and move forward from there. But the way we are going now, we are doing the same things and expecting a better result. We're not going to have that. If you pay a teacher a proper salary, then you should be expecting productivity at the proper level. It will not be world class. It will not be best in class. It will not be, in line with global best practices. And this is where we need to go. We need to benchmark ourselves with the very best. There was a time several years ago I went to South Africa after they had the World Cup there. I think they had the World Cup in 2010, and this was 2014. And I saw the level of roads that they built. I went to Cairo also. I saw the kind of roads that they built there. I want to tell you today that the roads to Heathrow Airport in the UK are not as good as the ones in Cairo and the one in Johannesburg, which means that the Africans have the capacity to do better if they are determined to do it. And here in Nigeria, we must have that determination. We must have that vision. It starts with the vision that I want to make this country the Japan of Africa, and then we'll be able to achieve it through all these measures I'm talking about.
That's the ultimate dream, but it appears as if there's a long distance to cover as far as that is concerned. And it also seems like an all-consuming task, really, and we really do not envy the government, but they ask for it. But just before we wind down, and in 10 seconds each, I'd like you both to give a mark to the administration. So I'm going to start with you, madam. Over 100.
This is what you do every day.
This is what we do. So education in the last 1 year.
Education in the last 1 year, improvement from, I suppose, the beginning. I probably won't give a mark past half mark because we've heard promises, but we're yet to see truly how it's playing out.
So
less than
50% or less?
Yes.
Less?
Yes.
Okay. I sense a lack of commitment there, but it's okay, we'll accept that. Prof, what would you give? Over 100%?
I will give them 50%, which is a C.
50%?
I think that's what they are. Yes.
All right, that's good enough to reflect on. We'd like to thank you very much, Professor Abiodun Adeshegun. He's the chairman, Babcock University Schools Management Board, former dean, School of Education and Humanities, Babcock University. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and commitment to this cause. I would also like to thank you very much, madam, Mrs. Boyede Adebanjo, Educationist. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you.
Because of the importance of the subject, we're continuing after this time out, yet again looking at the strides of the administration in the education sector. Stay with us, we'll be right back.